Check, mic check.
We have a few more people coming in. Is this on? I think it is. We have a few more people coming in, but that's okay. Thank y'all so much for being here. Jeff has worked really hard on this project, and I really appreciate all the help he's giving us. And we appreciate Frank being here. Salia's not here today. She's at a football game. So Florida is playing Texas, and she has to be there. And so, but we appreciate everybody that's here. And for all the people that aren't here, they're going to miss a really good presentation. That's all I have to say. But even with a small group, I think we'll probably get more out of it because it is a small group, because we'll be able to have discussion and ask questions and feel more comfortable than if we had a large group. So you're going to be the lucky ones to be able to have that opportunity. This is our last workshop, or the Peace of Mind workshop, and I thank y'all, everybody, especially the folks from Congregational Care and from our grief support group who've been here to support it. Thank you so much for all your help. And I'm going to let Jeff go ahead and start.
All right. Folks, it's so good to see y'all, to be here, and because we're talking about grief and because we're talking about so much that's going on in our lives and our world, I want us to pause for just a moment of prayer if we can. God, many of us are grieving in many different ways and for many different reasons. But we come asking you to be with us, to sit with us a while as we sit with one another a while. And may your Spirit and may the Spirit of Christ be embodied here in us as we see Christ in each other, as we see Christ in the world, as we see Christ who is reaching out to embrace us in our time of grief. So bless us as we share this time together through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, friends, we are talking about grief. Did everybody get a workbook? Everybody get one of these? Okay. It's just it's the slides, it's a slide sheet plus it's other materials in the back, which we'll talk a little bit about. And but I want to start by introducing. So we'll move on to the next slide. Well, a couple of slides. This is on grief and loss, and then we're preparing for loss, recognizing grief, coping with the new life changes it brings. That's the subtitle of all this. And so as we gather here and those who are with us online, we welcome you. We're glad that you're here. And we invite you, if you have questions, I'm actually looking at the live stream here. It's a little bit delayed, so I try not to watch it too much. But if you have questions that you want to put in the chat or observations you want to put in the chat for those who are here, and I know it's just a small group right now, but anybody who wishes to, please feel free to share conversation in this through Facebook. And so what we're doing is we're talking a little bit about this, but I want you to know something about me. So the next slide will tell something that many people don't know about me. Whenever you see my name on an email or anything, it ends with these initials with comma DMIN comma PCC, and those are two different things that are two different completely areas of life. D-Min is that doctor of ministry, so that always goes at the end of my name. I rarely use doctor in front of my name. And then PCC, though, is something that is important because that's professional certified coach. So I'm credentialed as a coach through the International Coach Federation, and I hold 3 different certifications. But the one that's most important for us today is a certification in end of life and grief coaching. So I'm certified as an end of life and grief coach. So a lot of times, when people are in grief, or people who are in a dying process, that's where I bring those skills to bear. So the next slide tells us that we are using a coach approach to grief and dying. So a coach approach means that I ask questions, and that it's an opportunity for you to engage, because in coaching, I am not the expert. In coaching, you are the expert. You know you better than I know you. And you know how to, you have answers within you. Now, there is some teaching that goes on in grief in terms of helping people understand. But when we're using grief coaching, we have these principles that we use. So one of the resources that I use, and it's on this next slide, is called Coach Yourself Through Grief, Applying Coaching Principles to Your Grief Journey. And it's by Dr. Don Eisenhower, MCC, who is Master Certified Coach. So he's the highest level, and he is my coach. He's my personal coach. But his company is called Coaching at End of Life, and so he's a trainer, and he certifies people, and he actually trains coaches who go all the way through the process. And so this book is a book that I have and have used, but it's something, and I'm not sure if it's still in print, but it's something that we'll be talking about. So let's talk about loss. So I want to ask you a question. We're a small enough group. We're going to do a lot of this just together here. So what losses have you experienced as you've aged? Now we're going to talk about a specific loss, because I'm going to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that there are many in this church who are grieving this past week, who felt like that their vote did not, their candidate was not elected, and it feels like grief to a lot of people. So I get that. I also respect the fact that we have some within our church who did not feel the same way. So, but we'll talk about that a little bit. But tell me, what are some of the losses that you've experienced as you've aged? What would those be? You can talk. Health. Yeah. What else?
Giving up on dreams.
Giving up on dreams. Oh.
Things that you dreamed of that would happen.
Mm-hmm.
That you realize now you don't have time.
So the dreams that you had, that you now you're old, you're past the opportunity to achieve those dreams. They're getting out of reach. Oh yeah. So Sally can never make it onto the Olympic swim team. Yes, that's it. Friends and family. Yeah, losing friends and family. Yeah. Cognitive functioning. Yeah. What happens when we realize that we're beginning to slip, and in this day and time we know so much about dementia, various dementias, that it becomes scary that if I can't remember where I put my glasses, then suddenly I'm afraid that I'm slipping and going downhill, right? So, yeah. Well, so the next slides will tell us some of the things that we are grieving. Empty nest. How many of you, as your kids moved out, experienced any kind of? Some were doing happy dances, I'm aware, but some were grieving. I mean, especially when our youngest moved out, we experienced a real kind of empty nest. Like, oh my gosh, things have fundamentally changed in our house, right? And so loss of parents, and so we're all at the age where we've lost or are losing parents, and so we've done that. Loss of employment or retirement. Now, most people that we know, that they experience the loss of through retirement, but at the same time in our economy there's loss of job. that where somebody who is in their 50s and loses a job and then is now too old for other jobs, right? Or not considered by other employment agencies or companies. So moving from an established home is another one. How many of you moved here from somewhere else to be close to kids? That's a big number. That's a big number, and that happens frequently for us. And then we've experienced loss of siblings. So our siblings, many of us are at the age where we lose siblings before our time arrives. Then loss of friends. On next slide, loss of friends through moving and death. But a lot of times we lose our friends. And one of the things I will add is something that I was actually talking to someone about before this, is that the potential loss of friends or already loss of friends over this harsh political environment that we're in, right? That we've lost friends who have just gone a completely separate way. One of the things that we're aware is that Thanksgiving is going to be tough for a lot of families this year, right? And that would have probably been true no matter which way the election went, but it's true. So, the loss of health we talked about, loss of spouse or partner. We have people who here are who are widowed, who've gone that, and that's a very significant loss for us because it's something that's very sharp. And then facing our own death, the loss of our own lives, is something that's really important to talk about and to acknowledge. So what is grief? Help me know what grief is.
With the definition or through experience?
Either way, tell me.
Grief is painful.
Grief is painful.
Excruciatingly painful.
Yes, it is excruciatingly painful. It's the pain that we experience after loss. So that's I think that's the next slide. Is that right? No, yeah, grief is triggered by loss. Yes. We're stepping into a very dark place, and that's the thing that so for many of us who have been very acutely aware of what's been going on in this presidential election, I think there are many who are feeling the same thing. We're stepping into a darkness that we don't know. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's next. We don't know if predictions hold true and the economy doesn't last through this. What does it look like? And it's a pain that seems to be too much to bear. It's a hole in our hearts. And I had a very so I want to give credit to someone who is a member of our church, who is a part of the Chapel Dwellers class. But when our son-in-law died in 2016, it was a tragic loss, and our daughter, and they lived in Hawaii, we got on the plane, we got there. And so one of the things that I received, because the church they were caring so much about us during that time, and I was gone for seven Sundays, 7 weeks. And so when the church collected a lot of cards that were sympathy cards and just wanting to share love, and they collected those and then they sent those to me in Hawaii. So the office boxed them all up and sent them. And in the middle of that was a letter that was from Kathy Balsamo. And Kathy and Stan are part of this church, as I said, and Kathy shared this most beautiful letter, and it was a revision of a letter that was sent to her when she lost her husband at the age of 30. And so she shared this, and it talked about the hole in the heart. And it said that hole is a hole that will never go away. It's a hole that's always there. It'll get rough edges around it. You can care for it, but it's never going to not be there. And so this whole idea of what a hole in a heart feels like. And then Marge Sipple brought something to a grief group, and Marge is one day going to do like a full workshop on that one, is brain mapping. And that's the hole in the brain, right? It feels like a hole in our brain that we can't function, right? So we experience things like brain fog. We experience this idea that we can't make sense of it. And there's actually a whole science behind that, because what happens is that this key person in your life occupies a very intentional portion of your brain, right? And when that's gone, your brain doesn't know how to function around that, and you're reorienting. So it's literally your brain working to rewire around that. And Marge, am I getting that close to the basic thesis of that? It's just a remapping of your brain that's got to happen. And so that's a really big thing. So the question next is then, what is mourning? Because grief and mourning are not the same thing. Can anybody share what mourning is? Anybody? Falling on the floor sobbing. Yes, that's it. Falling on the floor sobbing. What else? What do we do when we mourn? She said falling on the floor sobbing. Yeah. It's
allowing your emotions to come out.
Yeah. It's setting your emotions free. It's saying, let the emotions out.
One of the things
And
in Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, she says that grief is in charge.
yes.
And you can't be in charge of grief.
Right.
It's in charge of you.
So yeah, I'm gonna quote that for the live stream. But Brene Brown says in her book Atlas of the Heart that grief is what's in charge. You're not in control of it, and you can try to repress it. You can try to put it down, and you can go to work and you can get busy. Which I'm going to tell you something, friends. This is not a secret. This is not a secret, but it's something that is something that needs to be spoken. That culturally, and this is a generalization, not true all the time, but generally, men are going to grieve differently than women. And it's going to be something that I try not to draw gender generalizations, but it's something that women have been taught how to share emotion. And so when that grief hits, they can move very quickly. Men get busy, we do things, and sometimes and there are a lot of men and women who have remarried, and it's something that is normal and expected. But sometimes men are moving faster in that direction just because they don't know what to do with that hole that's in their lives, and they don't know how to mourn. And one of the things, if I could teach us, and especially men, but if I could teach all of us one thing, it would be, let's learn how to mourn. How many have read through the Psalms sufficiently in the Bible to see the Psalms of lament? Who knows this one? My God, why have you forsaken me? What's that? Anybody know the Psalm? You know Jesus said it, right? Jesus quotes it. It's Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, there are psalms of lament that are about how we are being beaten down, how we are being crushed, and it's this crying out to God. And so we're going to talk a little bit about faith and what happens in that. But one of the things that happens in grief and our mourning is that what I discovered, even having been clergy for now 42 years, but when we lost our son-in-law, my relationship with God shifted. There was a shift that went on there. And it's something because I moved into lament and was asking, where are you? When I was preparing my time to come back, and we literally were having to not just deal with our son-in-law, the grief of our loss of our son-in-law, but we had to move our daughter and her daughter, and our daughter was pregnant. We had to get her moved here for her to be with us to have the baby. She was here for about 10 months and then went back, but we had to get all of her stuff in storage. We had to do all this stuff. But there was a point where I was on a it was before Zoom was a thing. I was on a video call with my staff parish relations committee of the church, which is the personnel committee for those who don't know. And so I'm talking to them, and I'm telling them about what's gone on and how the grief how I'm processing grief. But then in the process of it, as we talked about when I was coming back, I said, and this was about 4.5 weeks in, I said, right now I can't come back and speak for God because I am not yet speaking to God. I'm not there. I'm not at that place. So mourning is that most important thing. So next slide is grief is what we feel, mourning is what we do. Okay, so we need to learn mourning. So I had this set for small groups, but for like groups of 4 or 5. But you know what? We're small enough. The next question is something that I want you to share. And why don't you just turn to somebody around you and just quickly share what you've lost and what you are mourning. Okay. So, and y'all can, if you're just sitting with your spouse, you can kind of move into the group or whatever and just ask. But share with somebody, what is it that you have lost and how have you mourned? So I'm going to call this back and interrupt y'all. I know there's lively conversation. What are some of the ways that we've mourned? What are the things? What do we do when we're mourning? What new ideas do we have? Anybody? What else? You can cry. You can laugh. Yeah. Yeah. You can pray. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. Anger is a big one. And we have people who don't really like that, right? I mean, people who really react adversely to our mourning, right? So, okay, so let's talk about grief coaching principles. So that's going to be the thing that is really critical for us to understand, is that if I'm talking about coaching, there are 8 principles I want to talk us through, okay? So these are the principles of grief coaching. And the first principle is find a safe place. So as we talk about a safe place, where are places that you in your grief may not have felt safe? Anybody? In church. In church. Yeah, we're going to talk about that big in the next, after we take a break after a little bit. But that's big, church. Making church a safe place. So where else might not be safe? Work. Yeah. How many companies give 3 days of bereavement? Yeah. I mean, we know companies out there that say when you've lost, you get 3 days. You've lost your spouse, and you get 3 days, right? I mean, and that's hard, right? Early knows it. And so that is something that when you lose a spouse, that when you're working in a specific job, that they're going to tell you, your time's up, come back. And if you bring your grief and your mourning into work, that ain't going to work for you, right? No. Yeah, it causes problems. It does. So we have this, the next slide will show, we have this intolerance for grief, and it's been really experienced in the Western world. There are many other countries where men and women know how to mourn and are given that opportunity. When you see, and in Middle Eastern countries, when you see during this terrible war that's going on, and they show the visuals of someone who has died, who has been killed in this, and what do? They're all out in the street. They're carrying the coffin up high over them, and what are they doing? They're wailing. They're wailing. And that's one of the things, that wailing is a lost art in almost all of the Western world. Now, we may do it on our own somewhere, but if we're wailing out in public, what's happening? People are calling, saying they notice it for sure, and they not only notice it, they want to stop it. They want you. So what do? They come and they're telling you, feel better, get over this. One of the things that as we talk about mourning, I had, whenever my dad died right before we came here, and he died unexpectedly. He had a surgery and then ended up with pneumonia, and then ended up on ventilator, and then had likely threw off a clot is what happened, and then he suffered from a stroke and died. And I was busy. Because I was moving here. I literally was packing. It was in April of 2013, and I was busy putting things together. I had to finish things at the church where I was, and I had a few weeks to do that, and I had all these things that were going on, and so I was busy wrapping up the ministry there. And when Don Eisenhower, that I introduced to you earlier, my coach, called me, and he asked me how, he was asking about my dad's death, and I told him, and then he paused for a moment, and he said, "How are you mourning? How are you mourning?" And I went, "I'm busy, Don. I got a lot of things going on." And he cautioned me. He said, "I would encourage you to learn to mourn." And you know that I did not mourn my dad's death for 2 years. 2 years it took me, because I felt this pressure not to. And I had to get here. Y'all didn't want me to come in, even though I came in with a lot of stress, because I was, at the same time I moved here, I ended up having to move my mom here literally 2 months later. And she was here in a nursing home where she died a year after that, a little over a year after that. So it's like I'm going through all this stuff, and the church was very caring, but I wasn't going to show up here and be the guy who's wailing. You don't want a wailing pastor. Well, some may be okay with it, but I guarantee you attendance would have slumped a lot had I been here just wailing, right? So it's this intolerance that we have. And so even our closest friends and family may not be tolerant of our grief, and especially our mourning. So there's a scene in, I have every Christmas, I have these, I tell people here know a lot about me, about movies that I talk about and things that I see, my Disney addiction and all that kind of stuff. So, but when I had every year I watch these shows, and one of the ones I love to watch is A Christmas Carol, but it's not just any Christmas Carol. It is the 1984 George C. Scott Christmas Carol, because he is the best Scrooge ever. And so, some of the stuff is a little cheesy sounding, the music and so forth, compared to today's music. It's a little digitized and stuff. But the thing that happens is there's this moment where they're in Christmas yet to come, the Christmas yet to be, and and little tiny Tim has died in that scene, right? And so it shows Dad coming in and sitting down, and he's talking about walking by the cemetery, because I promised him that every day I would walk by the cemetery. And he starts to cry. He starts to mourn. And his oldest son says in the movie, and this is one of my you got it wrong. The oldest son says, Father, please don't grieve. Don't grieve. And he looks around and he goes, of course, I have all my other children. I have all these things. I'm counting my blessings and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, we missed it. But that is the example of how we treat grief and mourning in our Western world. Don't grieve. Don't. So here's the thing, that when we're looking for a safe place, we're going to find someone who, and we'll switch to the slide, who will allow you to hurt, who will allow you to cry, who will give you permission to feel whatever you feel. And you're going to find someone who will give you permission to do whatever you want to do. Next slide. And do whatever you want to do. We'll not try to fix you, and will give you permission to say whatever you want to say. How many of you have said something in your grief, in your mourning, that has seemed off-putting to close friends? Anybody? Use a Sally. Right. Yeah. So for those who, yeah. So for those who didn't hear, Sally, after Scotty died, had had a friend that came and had this methodology of I'm going to take everything that you're going to be giving away. And while it wasn't soon, it was something that needed to happen. And so moved all of that to a warehouse, and then so Sally's sharing that in another church, another setting, grief group, and people are horrified at it. They can't believe that. One of the things I know has happened is when people have shown up in a grief group and they have either been angry at God or questioned the existence of God. And they use language that says that very clearly. And what happens in a church grief group? What happens? Oh no, we're in a church. We're in a church. Can't say that. No, I mean, it's the thing. We have to have those safe places. And sometimes you want to go do things that are maybe crazy. You want to go do something that's very not you, but it's something that you just need to do. And you need a friend to go with you and do that. And so, and assuming it's not dangerous or terribly risky, you hopefully have a friend that's willing to just go do whatever it is, So, so that's something that is where the person, and this is an image that also comes from Brene Brown, and it has to do with empathy. And what empathy is not me coming down into your darkness and turning on all the lights, right? She has this, there's a great cartoon that goes with her description of this that was done by the Royal Academy of Arts, I think. And anyway, but it's an image of someone who's down in a hole, because that's how grief is for them. They're down in a hole, and that it shows people who she's telling about different people, like the person that's coming that sticks their head there, steps part of the way down, turns on the light for you, and then comes on in, or the person who just sticks their head in and says, "Don't grieve. I hope you feel better. I'm praying for you," but does nothing else. And bless your heart. Bless your heart. Yeah, that's it. And so you want that person who is willing to just come sit in your darkness with you and do with you whatever it is that you need to do, right? So that's important. So the second grief coaching principle is important because it's called board the roller coaster and hold on tight, because it is a roller coaster. So it is something that on that roller coaster, then we're going to recognize denial. We're going to embrace our feelings, be ready for the ups and downs because they're going to come. And be ready for, and we talked about this, unexpected laughter and unexpected tears. How many of you have been who have experienced really dark grief, that you're talking to someone and you start to talk about your loved one, and you're not intending to make it a sad thing, you're not intending to cry, and suddenly a thought, some image hits your brain, and you immediately are in tears. Has that happened? Happens to me. Yeah. Happened today. Yeah. So if that when we begin to talk about that person, and it's really interesting because so part of my own mourning, and some of you were here for my mother-in-law's memorial service, but Leah, my wife, had wanted me to do that, told me I needed to do that, and so when I did it, I wasn't prepared for how much mourning I was going to be doing while doing it. That I started talking about her, and suddenly all kinds of stuff just bubbled to the surface, and I wasn't going to control it, and I didn't try to control it. It was something that I had to take a few breaths and pause for a moment, but it's something that when we hit that roller coaster, that we're going to experience those ups and downs. And so what you're looking for on this next slide is someone who is willing to ride the roller coaster with you. So it means somebody who is, when that burst of anger comes out, they simply give you the space for it. When those tears come, or when the laughter comes, they're willing to convert to laughing with you. It may feel disrespectful. Why am I laughing about this thing? But it's just a reality. So that's a big thing. So the third grief coaching principle is to tell your story. So as you tell your story, it's important to be able to have friends and groups where you can tell your story. And you can talk about your grief. You can talk about your and it's not just talking about just the loss of the loved one. It's being able to say, what's new about me? What's new about me? And some of the things we can do is we can write down our memories. We can write down our emotions. We can find a trusted friend with whom to then share these stories. And another Brene Brown insight is that when we talk about a group, or friends, that we often think, I've got to have this group of friends. I've got to have this big group of friends. And what she says, if you have 2 or 3 people with whom you are close, that's enough. That somebody, even just one other person who is willing to listen to you and be with you and let you share your memories and emotions. Because one of the things that we do in our intolerance for grief is that we very often try to shut down those stories because we know, it's going to lead to tears. So let's talk about something else. Let's change the subject and do something different. So so that's important. The fourth grief coaching principle is learn what is normal grief. What's normal grief, okay? So there are a couple of key things here, is that when we are experiencing grief, especially when we experience the depth of grief of losing a spouse or a child or somebody who is really, really close to us, that we sometimes are afraid, it's like, I'm going crazy. I had this anxiety that I never had before. I wasn't an anxious person. Now I don't know what's coming next. That feeling of waiting for the next shoe to fall. And what is it that's going to hit next that's going to upend my life, right? And so it's the normal grief is, and also grief fog. When we talk about mental, the fear of loss, Jim mentioned it early on, the loss of mental acuity or cognitive function, that in those first days of grief, especially in intense grief, we don't know where anything is. I don't even know, it's like what we have this fog that just hits us and is incredibly intense. And so that's something important. So we have these feelings of anxiety, as I said, physical effects of grief. What are physical effects of grief? Somebody share. Loss of appetite. Not going to eat. What else? Yes. Either both extremes. Unable to sleep at all or just sleeping all the time. Right. What else? Don't want to move. Don't want to move. Just sit. Just hold on. Okay, what else? Eating too much, yeah. The opposite of loss of appetite is I'm just going to, it's my comfort food, right? Yeah. And so, those are big things. And so the thing that we get lost in is like, because we don't know, and this is where a grief coach can help, it's where friends can help, it's where a grief group can help, is the question of, when do I seek professional help? When am I at risk physically? When do I see my doctor? So that's the next slide. Is when do I see a doctor or when do I see a therapist? And it's not, and sometimes people in grief move more quickly to therapy than they might otherwise. But even a good therapist is going to tell you, the thing that happens, and Marge was giving me the sign of self-medication. Yeah, self-medication, meaning that people can try to drown their sorrows in alcohol and food. But when do we seek professional help? Well, there's some signs. If what's happening to you physically is really causing you to be more ill, and you are unable to cope with that, then a doctor can help and help provide some guidance in what you can do. A therapist is good whenever we get locked into a portion, in some part of grief. I'm not talking, there's all the stuff out there about the stages of grief that are anger, it's denial, anger, despair, all the different emotions surrounding grief, which you can find those, and I should have included those. I'm sorry I didn't include those as a reference. But the thing that happens is that some people get really locked in. They cannot get out of depression. They cannot move. They can't. They get locked. Their job gets at risk because they're not moving. They're not doing things. What else, Kathy?
As a support person for something like that,
Mm-hmm.
how do you navigate?
How do you navigate it if you're supporting? If you're
When you can see,
right, when you see that, right.
I understand the hole in their heart will never go away.
Right, and I think it's one thing to be able to say that, stuff like, we've been friends for a long time, and I for the last 6 weeks, you've been really stuck here. I get anger. Anger's a very real thing, and you have every right to be angry. But if you're stuck there, might it be something that that we might need to talk about professional help, and to destigmatize professional help? There's no stigma attached to it, but would it be helpful for you maybe just to talk to a therapist and to encourage that? Someone who is just stuck in especially where when you have, for many of us it'd be children. For those who are retired, it might be your child, but you see that they're stuck, and they're, as Early said, they're not moving. They're not, and they're about to lose their job. And you see this happening, and you go, look, this is about to have some real serious economic impact on you, because you're going to lose your job if you don't get up and get going. And so how can we help that? And that's when you can say, why don't we consider talking to a doctor? Because if it is depression, it's like doctors are not always prone to throw drugs at emotions, but if somebody is really stuck in that deep place, it might be that an antidepressant, at least for an interim time, is appropriate. But that's something you got to talk to the doctor about, or a psychiatrist about. So it's something that we have to give them that opportunity. So it's something that as we talk about normal grief, that's where we talk about professional help. So the fifth grief coaching principle is take as much time as you need. Here's one of the things that we are, and I love, there was actually I heard a speech that Brene Brown was giving, that she was talking about grief, and she was sharing she was in Colorado, and she was talking to a lot of therapists that were there, and she was talking about grief, and she was talking about the fact that, what in our church is an example, but how we need to get businesses to understand that grief is not on a timeline. And so our church, whenever our board was revising our personnel handbook, we had originally, I don't know if y'all know that, originally we had 3 days for bereavement. And we were like, no, back off. We're going to change that. And so we changed it. And so what it says is that it gives a period of like 2 weeks or something that's in there, but then we say that should additional time need to be taken, one of the things that we do is we use paid time off for staff and so forth, but what we do is we share paid time off, because most of our staff have plenty of PTO left, and so we'll share it, and we just say we're gonna, and if there's none to share, as the pastor, I can override that and say, nope, you're still going to get paid time off, and you're going to go. So it's something that we are very much understanding that it is not on a timeline. So one of the things as we talk about this is on the next slide. When my son-in-law died, here's Dad, the grief coach, showing up. Only I'm the one suffering as a family member, and I'm not going to be the coach in that moment, except that when we got to our daughter, which was a long 9-hour flight before we could get to her, and we finally got to her, and she fell into my arms, sobbing and heaving, and I told her in that moment, I said, people are going to tell you do this day by day or week by week. We're going to do this breath by breath. Breath by breath. Take the next breath. Then we're going to talk about the first days and what we expect in the first days. That's where that fog is going to be so heavy, where it's going to be really hard to function. And within the first weeks, we're going to need to start making some decisions. We're going to have to do some things, and it's going to have to do with clothes, with what we're doing with clothes. It's going to have to do with filing for insurance if we have insurance. We're going to be doing, having to kind of reorganize how we're going to make money if we lose a wage earner. What's going to happen here? And so that's something that we've got to be very clear about. The first months is going to be where we're going to still watch for grief to pour out, but then in the first months, we're going to be encouraging steps that are going to be more. And then in the first year is that we're going to make it through the first year, because then what we have to be prepared for in all of these breaths, days, weeks, year is going to be anniversaries. What anniversaries do we have to face? Wedding anniversaries. What else? Death. The anniversary of the death. Birthdays. Birthdays are going to be showing up. Holidays are big. That is a killer, isn't it? You know, you want to do, and especially early. Can I share just a minute that Early has 2 children, and he's a single dad, and lost his wife, and you've got that. You've got, how are you going to have a holiday with your children? How are you going to do that? And so it's like, do we take those steps? And one of the things that we do here, and it's actually got moved up a little bit early, and it is on Monday, I think it's December 17th. We had to move it up a bit. We had a conflict. We were going to try to do it a little bit later in the week. It's not actually, the longest night of the year is actually the 21st of December. We're moving it up a little bit earlier, still calling it a longest night service. But what we do is we reorient, because we only have we plan for about 40 or 50 people. But we reorient this room. We face our prayer corner, and we have a service that is, and it's not all sad. But it acknowledges your grief. It says Christmas is hard, right? So that's something that we work on, is how we do that, how we navigate those. So the 6th grief coaching principle: don't let anyone tell you what to do. Don't let anyone tell you what to do, because there are people who. How many of you have ever felt like your grief has been hijacked by a well-meaning friend? Anybody? Yeah. So you know what that is whenever your well-meaning friend is going to say, oh, no, let's not go do that. Let's go do this, because this will make you happier.
Or you should do your funeral arrangements this way, or you should do it that way.
Right. Coming in, telling you how the funeral should be done. And you already know what you and your spouse wished for, right? And so that's something that's really important. So you are the expert on your own grief journey. That's coaching principle number 1. That's the big coaching, or not the principle, it's the overview of coaching. You are the expert. So the person in grief, if you're walking with someone in grief, you may have a whole different set of ideas, especially if you've experienced grief and you are kind of wanting to help. Like, oh, I know what that feeling is. Oh, I can tell you what to do next. It's like, what you have to do, especially if you're someone who is still working with grief, is you look at that person and you go, you tell me what you need. So that person that is in grief gets to be their own expert. So we don't get to tell them what to do. 7th grief coaching principle is discover your new normal. One of the handouts in the back is, I think it's almost the first black and white after the slide pages, is about the healing pathway. And it looks like this. And the other side is this, the graphic that's used on it. So the healing pathway is and this is from a resource that I'll talk about a little bit later. But this healing pathway is something that takes us, and some people don't like the name New Normal. Some people don't like to talk about the new normal, and I get that. But what's emerging is something that is going to be a new normal. It's something that is, and very often we don't want to talk about, because we wanted the old normal, right? How many of us want to go back to where we had that old normal? I want what we used to have because it was secure. I knew how things were going to function, but that's gone. That's gone. And so there's now a new normal that's going to emerge. And so that's going to be really important. So it involves a new identity, a new relationship with the one who died, which is interesting because we still are in relationship with our loved one. No matter how we deal with that, no matter what we do, we have a new relationship. And so for the death of each of my parents and my in-laws, after their deaths, the relationship shifted, and we were in a different place. One of the things that happens is purification of memory for me is that I can set, if I'm forced into the cognitive, into that left side of my brain, I can go back and I can recount all the things that were difficult in our relationship, right? So how many of you had a perfect relationship with your spouse? No, we did not. And so we end up in a place where we are talking about what it means to have that new relationship with that one who died. My mother-in-law, there were times, I laughed about this last Sunday, I think I said this, that there was always that mother-in-law, son-in-law relationship going on, kind of like, and she lived with us for 15 years. She lived with us. So there were definitely some downs as well as ups in that relationship. But you know what's happened since she's died is the downs don't matter as much to me. I can remember how she showed up. I can remember the ways that she touched our lives. I can remember the things that she did. And so it's a purification of memory that happens as we move on. We often have a new group of friends. How many of you had friends as couple friends, right? That our families would get together and do things. And then suddenly, and our daughter experienced this, that she had friends who were families, and they still would include her, but she always felt like, because there's always an odd number now among the adults, right? There's an odd number because now she's the third or the fifth, and so it's like that difficulty there. And so you end up sometimes with different friends that you make that are maybe experiencing life the same way you are. A new sense of purpose. And one of the things that we hope emerges out of this new normal is that you can develop a new sense of purpose. Why are you here? Because one of the things I will tell you, and we've had this, I've watched it happen. For those who know George and Barbara Brightwell, who were part of our church, everything around here is named for them, and all around town. And we watched when George died. Barbara could not refocus. And it was in weeks that she died. She died weeks later because she had no vision of what a new purpose could ever be. And I get that. And that happens to a lot of people. There are a lot of couples that die months or, a year and a half apart. And so it's something that's really hard, and it's something that is a real challenge. So that's something that as we talk about what purpose is, it helps us who are in grief to know that there still is, you have a purpose. What is your purpose? And so I want you to be thinking about that. And then finally, the 8th grief coaching principle is to celebrate your growth. So one of the things that as you take a step to celebrate, call friends, go out, say, hey, I feel like I finally am moving, and this is another step I've taken. And you celebrate growth everywhere, every time. You don't wait till you're finished. Don't wait till you're finished. Celebrate every step that you take in this. So, okay, so I'm going to move us to a short break. Let everybody take time to freshen up coffee cups if you need, or water, and there's still snacks out there. But I'm going to give us probably just about 5 minutes maybe, or what do y'all normally take? 10 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes isn't enough. So take 10. Take 10. We'll reconvene here at 9:40. Okay? Okay, friends, so we will reconvene, and thank y'all for writing all this out with me, and I hope that this has been helpful for you as you've as we've talked about resources and ways to talk about grief. Many who have been in our grief group, we had a grief group that had met for a few months, and still are kind of. There's still a core of that group that still gathers and talks and keeps up with each other, and so we have friendships that have formed out of that group. We attempted another grief group that was going to just be short term, of seeing us through the holidays, of kind of working through the holidays. We just didn't have much interest in that, so we figured we would kind of wrap some of these things in here as we talk about that. One of the things we will talk about church in just a moment. One of the things that I wanted to mention is something that's called complicated grief. So complicated grief, or there's also grief that's simply unacknowledged. So what complicated grief is going to be people who experience multiple things that may happen even at the same time. It's someone who we've had in our church people who were divorced, and then so they have that grief of a divorce, and then they're talking about their ex-spouse dies, and there's still grief around that, right? And so, but we also have grief that's unacknowledged in our culture. So, how do we care for those who have had miscarriages, who have lost a pregnancy, those who have lost things that we don't think as much about. It's kind of interesting. Our pets have become parts of our family these days. So when we lose a pet, there's grief around that. But when we lose, what other griefs do we have in our culture that are unacknowledged? Anybody?
I think the grief many of us are experiencing this week.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to speak to our grief with people that we feel safe with.
Yes. Yeah, we have out of the election, many in this church are in grief about what's happened, and we're looking for safe places to talk about that grief and that fear and the darkness that we may feel we're going into. And so it's something that, and much of what's been said. Yes, sir.
One grief is like, if somebody dies, and you're in that person,
Mm-hmm.
like say if one of your family members dies,
Mm-hmm.
or one of you didn't have the relationship to forgive that person, and that person dies, and you never did tell them you love them or forgive them.
Right.
That's a big.
There's something, we're going to talk about that early. We're going to get there because that's a grief that is somebody that you didn't get to finish. It's unfinished business. And so we also have grief around job loss because, and you have well-meaning people who go, oh, well, you can always get another job. You can get another job. Well, maybe you can, but what about the loss of friendship that you had if you were in a company that you were working with people and you really had it's interesting because when we really look at our world, when people are working 8-hour days, you're spending 8 hours with people that every day, and that's many times, that's more hours spent with these people than you're spending with your own family. In the total picture, right? So when one of those, when a friend at work dies, or when a friend at work is fired, or when you lose a job, that we don't often acknowledge that grief. Very often companies don't realize whenever they terminate an employee that's in the middle of a group of people who are functioning fairly well, but this one employee, for whatever reason, was terminated, and they don't realize that sometimes they set a bomb off in the middle of that group, right? And that grief that is in that group is unacknowledged, and so that's very important. Well, yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Your experience of helping your daughter through her grief made me think about the time that many of us have had to put our grief aside to help somebody else.
Right.
or to help our family. I mean, when a parent dies and you're in charge
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's coming to your house,
Yep.
you can't mourn.
Another
Yeah, how do you, what suggestions
yeah.
find ourselves in those situations?
This is one, you remind me of things that I'm like, oh, I should have put this in. There's another resource that we have that we've used here at the church for years, and it's called the Circle of Care. So I can help you draw it. So you draw a dot in the middle, and then you start drawing concentric circles around it, okay? So when grief sets off, you're going to find what's ground zero. What's ground zero? And so in the circumstance of my daughter's death, who's at ground zero? She is, and our granddaughter is. Our 3-year-old granddaughter and our daughter are right there when the bomb. That's where the greatest amount of pain is. Okay, we're not at ground zero. And there was some contention around others that kind of wanted to be in closer and be at ground zero. It's like, no, you're not at ground zero. You're in the next circle out. So parents, siblings are in the next circle out. We're out. And then you have close friends and you have others, and you start growing that circle, and you get out to the point where it's people you work with, or it's people who. So here's how that works, though. That support goes in toward the middle. So listening, caring, support, whatever we can do to help goes inward. Where we get our help from is from outside. So and they use a word in this circle of care that says that our own grief that we dump outwards. I don't particularly like the word dumping outwards, but we send it out. Where my support came from was from people who were in the next circle out. So the next circle out was going to be other family, friends that we were close to. But there was another circle out there that was really, really helping me, and that was the church. So we're going to talk about church, because that's where that connection. So that circle is so I learned the healthy way of saying that I'm not going to my daughter to talk about my grief about her husband's death. Now, it's not that we don't share grief. We do share it, and we do talk about it, but I'm not going to make her bear the burden of me wailing to her, right? I'm going to let her wail to me, and then my wailing is going to be outward. I experienced some, but it went outward. And it was and so my question then is, who are those friends that who are in the next circle out? So I think that's a really valuable tool for us as we talk about grief in our church, is that when somebody has a significant loss, that they're ground zero. They get to be the dot in the middle. And then we ask where we are. And so, because there are times that as a pastor, I may be drawn in, depending on the pastoral relationship, my relationship with the person, I may be in pretty close to the middle. That's where I was, honestly, with George and Barbara, because I spent so much time with them. So I was in that next circle right outside of them, right? So but then as a church, we came together and we began to acknowledge. And one of the things that happened was, in that circle that was outside, and this is an important thing to remember, in that circle that was outside of George and Barbara, they had such big lives in our community. I met people I didn't really know, and they were in the same circle with me. And we all became friends. And we had breakfast together, and we do things, and it's like we became friends at that point because we realized, hey, we're standing in the same circle, you know? And so that's important to remember. But sometimes the pastor is 4 or 5 circles out, but I'm there. So when anything comes to me, if it's just people in my church who are grieving the loss of a friend that is, 4 circles in from them, that they need pastoral support, I'm there. That's why I'm here. And so that's important, I think. So, yes, sir.
I don't know if I can express this well, but grief is contagious.
Mm-hmm.
If you're around someone who is actively grieving, it's going to move things inside of you that have to do with you. It's not them.
Mm-hmm.
You. And then you have to walk away and
Yes.
A lot of the wanting people to feel better, don't show me, is an avoidance of what is inside of me.
Exactly. Exactly. I want you not to grieve because I don't want to grieve. And so what Jim's saying,
About what you're grieving about, I'm grieving about.
but your own thing. Right. And that's one of the things that so what Jim's saying is that in grief that we have that very often somebody else's grief stirs something within us, and it's our own grief. It's about something entirely separate maybe from what they're, but we don't want to feel that in this moment. I'm too busy. I've got things I don't want to go there, and I can't go there maybe. And so I'm going to ask you to please be well. Please stop, because I don't want to do that. Don't, like I said from Christmas Carol, Father, please don't grieve. So here's the question: how can Wellspring or any other church home that you may have be end of life safe? So that's one of the things. So when we did in 2014. Don Eisenhower, my coach, came here and did a training session for a small group of people who were doing caring ministry, and it was around grief. And there were several of us that continued on and did an actual certification. That when I talk about being certified as an end-of-life and grief coach, that we had more to do. So in order to finish that, I had to actually come up with a document that was how I was going to work to help Wellspring be end-of-life safe. Okay. And so what that means is exactly what we're talking about here, is that we're going to be a place where if someone comes in here in the throes of grief, that we are going, and if we hear somebody because we're not going to control everybody in the congregation. There's going to be somebody who is going to say, oh gosh, but you know what? I felt the same thing and it gets better. And what can we do in that moment? What can you do? You're not going to rebuke the person that said that. They were trying to be helpful. But what you're going to say is, can I talk to you for a minute? And you go find that person that's in grief and go, I don't really believe that. You have your own grief. And you get to have you're on your own roller coaster. How can I help you? That's how we do it. So we begin working to become end-of-life safe. When you have been in grief, because many of you who are here, most of you here are here because you've been in grief. When you're in grief, what can you say? What do you need to ask of your faith community to help you in your grief? What was it you needed?
Love and support.
Love and support. Big. Yeah. What else?
Nobody trying to fix you.
Nobody trying to fix you. Yeah.
Take your grief away.
Right.
But some people think that their job is to make you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't make you feel better, then they haven't done their job.
Right. Right. Their job is to make you feel better. And because we're a happy church, we're a friendly church, everybody comes in, they're all smiles. And so if somebody comes in with the cloud of gloom over the top of them, what are we trying to do? We're going, get rid of the cloud. Get rid of the cloud. Because we're happy people, right? So what we ask is that when people walk in with a cloud over them, that we acknowledge that, and we just kind of grab your umbrella and walk under the cloud with them, So, yes, Kathy.
I think when it's, like, not grief due to, like, I'm speaking specifically about divorce. I think just for the case that when I got my divorce, I was in a church that did not believe in divorce. It was like not even a recognition that I would experience grief.
Yeah, right. And that's really big, that when we have divorce, I know our average age is higher in this church, but in churches we have some young families, but when there's a miscarriage, and we have had a miscarriage in the church, how do we acknowledge that, and how do we surround that person with the support and care and let them have their space to grieve? When somebody goes through a divorce, one of the things, is like, and we're a church that we understand that we have people in all different kinds of relationships. We have people who are divorced. We have people who are we have people who live in our aging community who are partnered with someone, but they can't afford the cost of marrying is too high because they lose income. And so they've come out of some place and they're looking for acceptance. And so but the place where when somebody's divorced is one thing that can happen is, and we're not that church, but can feel judgment. So you're asking not to be judged in your grief, right? But also for someone who acknowledges the fact that there is brokenness in your life and that you've experienced that, and that's a place of grief, and to let you have that place to mourn and grieve. And that's very critically important, very important. Thank you. So there's a resource that I want to, these handouts that are in the very back are largely from this resource, and it is called Grief Work, Healing from Loss. And so it's a guide that I have. If there are more, there are other handouts that are available from that. I chose the ones that are most important. And so I simply want you to know the things that are there. So we talked about the healing pathway, mourner's rights. The serenity prayer is really a good thing to do. Where's the serenity prayer? Where do we hear that normally? In AA. Yeah, in AA or in 12-step programs. But that's something really big about grief. Accept the things I cannot change. What is it I cannot change? What are the things that I can change? What do I have control over? It's an assessment. So self-care domains, and then ask yourself the questions of what am I doing in each of these domains to care for myself. Leisure is important, to talk about what leisure activity, a sacred space. I'm just going through these. We're not going to do any filling out of these. Asking for help. This gives you some things to ask for help with. And then one of the things that really is important is they mean well. Now, that's going to happen. This is in the church. This is a thing that does happen in the church is they, that, you know, when somebody, when, I try not to ask this, but I find myself inadvertently asking, so how are you doing? Whenever it's like you're looking at somebody who, the big cloud is there. It's very visible. It's clear. I don't need to ask how they're doing because I know how they're doing. But I see your cloud. Yeah, I see your cloud today. There it is right there. Yes. And so, and you know, it's like probably for the best. Don't take it so hard. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you call me? It's like, well, because I didn't need you. The one big faux pas, and I moved in whenever my son-in-law died. I surrounded I was like a guardian for a guard, not a guardian, a guard for my granddaughter, was because I was anybody that said, and I was maybe a little bit harsh, but anybody that started moving in the direction of God needed an angel was like, stop there, because this child needed a daddy, and this child lost a daddy. That child needs a mama, and that child lost a mama. And for somebody to come up to Early and say, oh, but she's in so much better place and God needed an angel. Yeah, you felt that. Yeah, it does. And so you know, it's like all these things, and so you can come up with things that have been said to you and go, wow, this is like, and then things that are not helpful, and then responses that maybe you could come up with, and if somebody's saying don't cry, don't mourn, don't grieve, you can simply say, you know, I really need a safe place for that right now, and so thank you for trying to be there.
They always say it's a celebration for a homegoing, and it could be because they not suffering no more.
Right.
I understand that.
Right.
But they're not suffering no more, but I'm suffering.
You're suffering. Exactly. Yeah, in trying to make us feel good about, well, they're in so much better place. They're so much better place.
What do I tell my 6-month-old?
Yes. Yeah.
When she get to ask the questions?
When she wants to know about mama. And you go, well, she's in a better place. She's not with you. She's in a better place. What does that sound like, right? Yeah. It's like, I thought they were in a pretty good place with me. You know, I thought they were in a pretty good place here. Why is it yes, absolutely. Is that so there are people that come up and trying to help just don't help. And so then there's some tips on coping with special days and holidays, healing, as we've talked about, healing, some of the things that you can do. And the big one is the last one is affirmations, is that when you're really feeling stuck somewhere, grab some of these affirmations and look at them, okay? So those are really important. But let's go back just a little bit, though, because I want us to talk about more about the, back to where I was, that when, hang on. Yep. Let's go to this next slide, which is the art of dying well. So now I'm going to move away from people that we've lost, and we're not going to talk about grief. We're going to talk about dying, okay? And it's important. The church doesn't talk about dying very much because it's really uncomfortable. You know, it's like the notion that we just don't want to look at ourselves and go, one day I'll be dead, you know? But it's true. We're nascent beings. We know that one day we'll be dead. But the thing that is hard for us as a church, we should be talking about this. We're in, when we get into Lent, especially leading up to Easter, but even now as we're leading up to the very end of the Christian calendar. So in our following the Christian calendar, we're in what's called ordinary time, and then we end with Christ, the reign of Christ, or Christ the King Sunday. And then we begin Advent, which is the start of a new Christian calendar, right? So when as we're doing this, what we've had is Jesus who is on the road. Where's Jesus on the road to? He's on the road to crucifixion. And one of the things that if you read the Gospels carefully, John spends chapters on Jesus heading to his death. So he spends no less than 8 chapters out of a 21 chapter book of Jesus on the road moving to death. Okay, so it's this notion of Jesus teaching, I have to go there, I have to die. And so it's this constant reminder that we ourselves are dying, but also when we have people who are in the dying process. How many of you have walked with people who are going through a dying process, whether it's hospice or something like that? Yeah. So when we do that, there's some very important things for us to do. When someone you love is dying, just go ahead and skip 2 slides, is that we ask you to, you're supposed to stay present. Just be present. It's a hard thing when you see, and especially like my mother-in-law was in hospice, and until the very end we were kind of in and out, and we would go back and forth, but we were. But presence was really important, and there would be times that I would go sit with her and have nothing to say. She didn't have much. She'd repeat the same story over and over, and it was fine. I would just sit there and listen. But presence is critically important. Acknowledge their fear and their own grief. Someone who is dying is experiencing a different kind of grief. When it's our death, our grief, we have grief because we know what we're losing. We're losing touch with our family. We're losing our friends. We're losing life. And so it's that experience of acknowledging that grief, but then acknowledge your fear and your grief. It's okay to say that I'm afraid of what happens next, and I don't know. And it doesn't mean that you take away that you try to talk them down, or to make them just like don't go. But it's saying that I'm acknowledging that I'm going to have to go through some grief myself, and this is going to be real. Then one of the things that comes out of coaching, out of grief coaching, is help them say the 5 things. So the 5 things, and go on to the next slide. 5 things are Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. And goodbye. So one of the things, as we talk about in hospice, is that helping people say these things is critically important. Because when we talk about unresolved, so we're talking about things I wanted to say, okay? It's that idea that, and sometimes it's really good to kind of be on top of these things even when they're not dying, right? It kind of helps relationships. It helps relationships to say most of these things, right? So, but especially at the point of death, one of the things that I walked us through with my mother-in-law was asking for forgiveness for not being the best son-in-law, for not for the times that I didn't show up, for the times that I didn't say the right thing, for the time that I got angry or whatever. But then to acknowledge, and there were times that I was wrong, that I felt wronged by you, and I forgive you. And so, but then to say thanks, to say thank you for the things that we don't often practice our gratitude, right? And so when someone's dying, for them to hear the word of thanks, of gratitude from you is very important. And of course, I love you is critically important. But the biggest thing is in hospice is the capacity to say goodbye and to say it's okay. And very often in hospice, people, my grandmother, bless her soul, she hung on until I got there. She should have been gone 2 hours before I arrived, but I couldn't get there fast enough, and so I finally got there. And when I got there, I spent time telling her it's okay. She heard my voice, and within 20 minutes after I arrived, she was gone. So it's that process. So the other thing is that if we ask the dying to tell us things, ask about stories. How many of you have wondered about, it's like after someone's died, suddenly you come across something. We come across this in genealogy. It's like, wait, there was this cousin that she would have known and that we don't know that much about. And that cousin's gone. What else could we have known about that family, a part of the family? But to ask, what are things that you one of the things that's important is, what's your most prized possession? To let them have that, and to talk about what that most prized possession is. Sometimes it's a picture. Sometimes it's a trinket. It's not my beautiful set of china over here, because Lord knows we've got all of that. And but it's what are the things that meant the most to you? What are those things? And but then one of the things that before my mother-in-law died, we had her brother he's 95, he's still alive, but we got him on the speaker phone, we turn it on speaker, and we got him with where she could talk to him, and it was just like, and it was probably 4 days before she died. And you know what he did? He talked about the time that they picked cotton together as kids, whenever their dad was farming cotton, and talking about the things that they did as children. And we got to hear that, and we didn't know some of that stuff. I mean, we knew about the cotton, but he started telling stories about things that we didn't know. And she started talking and sharing stories. And so what are those stories? What are those things that we may not know about our loved one, that some distant memory? What was their favorite teacher? What was the thing that they learned that they felt like was a big thing for them to learn? So so those are really big things. And then one of the things is for you to share with them, to share some of your favorite stories. Next slide is that. And to share things that you want to share with them. The time that we went and did. Can you do that? I mean, can you picture that with a friend or with who's dying, or with a remember when we, and you share stories and share what your favorite stories are with them, the memories that you made together. The one thing that you will miss not telling them. I want my dad died while our daughter and daughter-in-law were both pregnant, because we have two sets of grandkids. We have two 11-year-olds, two 7-year-olds, and a 2-year-old. And so the two that were now 11, they were in utero. And what I told my dad when I wasn't sure if he could hear me or not was, I'm going to miss showing you your great-grandchildren. I'm going to miss sharing that with you, and spend some time in tears over that. So that's how their legacy will be shared. What's the legacy that they leave? What's the big mark that they made in this world and in your life? And you share that with them. So, and then there's obviously, and this is just a slide about the value of hospice care, but hospice helps us do so much of that. How many of you have experienced hospice? Many. And so hospice is something that helps us as we walk through that, and helps us talk about dying, and to walk with them on this journey. Hospice is about letting us live the fullest lives we can until we are gone. So what does that mean? Even in the 11th hour. In the 11th hour, there's something still to be done. So then we're going to move to a part that is really hard, is talking about our own death, planning for our own death. So as we think about the fact that we are people who are going to be dying, one of the things that Leah and I got, and this is a resource on this next slide, is called a knock box. It's next of kin. Now, we have some things out here that have been given by other people in helping prepare, but we have this box that, I kid you not, is this long, this wide, this tall, and it has all the folders pre-labeled of what we will need, what our children will need when we're gone, right? Or what either the spouse needs whenever, because one of us is going first, and I think nature has chosen probably me because I'm older than my wife, and men die 7 years older than women on average anyway. So, but what will you need? What will you need to take those steps? What has to happen? Because again, when we get in that grief fog, and within weeks, we've got to know. We've got to start dealing with the estate. We've got to start dealing with bank accounts, because if a bank gets wind, some banks are really good about not locking you down, but very often, if they get wind that if you say that my husband died or my wife died, if you have a joint account, they may lock it, and you don't actually have access to it. And so you've got to have death certificates. You've got to have letters testamentary. You've got to have the things that help you get organized. Well, that knock box is an incredible gift. And so it's something, they're literally, I mean, you can find fire-resistant knock boxes on Amazon for $35. Though if you can find them somewhere else, don't make Jeff Bezos richer. So, but then one of the things also, though, is as we talk about it, is being clear about our wishes at the time of death. Don't leave the next of kin guessing over what you want. If you wish to be cremated, if you wish to be embalmed or not embalmed and buried, still bodily burial, they just can't open the casket if you're not embalmed. If you prefer, some people have this thing of like, I don't want anybody, I'm going to be buried, but I don't want anybody looking at me. I don't want anybody to see the body. And so make those kinds of wishes known. And so what you wish for your body, what do you want there? One of the things that also I found important is to spend some time writing. I have on the desktop on my laptop, I've told the family, look there. there's a file folder that says Jeff's death on it. And it's not my son-in-law Jeff, it's this Jeff. Jeff's death. And when they open it, I have stored letters in there that I have written, I've typed, that I want my kids to hear. I want my grandkids to hear. So it's letters that I'm sharing about things, and it's a snapshot in time, and it might be something that needs to be updated. You know, if something you were going to say to your 4-year-old grandkid is not going to be relevant when they're 24, you know, so maybe you want to rewrite it if it's been a while. But I have that is open this and see, and let me say some last things to you. And so it's a gift. It's also, it helps them in their grief. It may help them move on quicker to mourning, to let them hear from you and let them hear from your heart. So that's really something important. One of the things is in writing your own obituary. I did include, before the healing pathway, there was one, it's right after the last slide page, is an obituary template. So people who have talked about obituaries, one of the things that, how many of you experienced a death and you were like, oh my gosh, now I've got to write the obituary and I hope I get everything, and you bring together family. When George and Barbara died, because they had no children, guess who was writing their obituary? Not just me. That circle of people that I met and became friends with and didn't really know, they were the ones I had, and I kept sending emails like, okay, I'm working on this. And they'd come back and go, oh, you're missing this. Oh, you're missing this. And it was a collective effort, but it was something that would have been so helpful had they written some things out. George had some things written out. Barbara had nothing. So we had to recreate Barbara from her story from ground up. But we had this, so this template helps of writing your own obituary, of saying, hey, this is something that I want to give to my kids. And even if you don't write it out in narrative form, just answer those questions. I've seen this because very often, many of you know that if I know when you're going, if you have a death in the family and when you're going to go at the funeral home, I've shown up with you, right? And so some of you I've shown up with. And when we go there, that we're talking about the obituary, and that when he'll be taking down information, or she, the funeral director, will be taking down the information. And what they ask is so I need their date of birth, which often we can get there, but then where were they born? So my mother-in-law died, and we had to stop and think about that just a minute and go, yeah, it was Caddo Mills. It was Caddo Mills. But then we had to go find her birth certificate just to make sure we were right, because we were, but it was one of those things. Is like, if we had all that right in front of us, it would have been so helpful had we just said, you know, had she written out things that were part of her life stories, and what things she accomplished, and what are the things that you're proud of, or what's the work that you've done, but also what you're most proud of with your family, and, you know, just begin to write those things. And your family will finish it. They'll take care of it and polish it up. But that's something that's critically, critically important. So before we move into this last part, I just want to ask if there are other questions, because we're getting near the end of our time, and I want to be faithful to our time. So what are questions or things that I did not cover that really you came here to looking for?
One of the things I'd like to say is on the questions or the things to say to each other, please forgive me, I forgive you. Don't wait till the very end
Yes, yeah,
to do that. My mom was in hospice for 2 years, and toward the end, a few months before she died, while she was still cognizant and aware, and we had that discussion, and it was so healing for both of us, because she felt guilty about things that, you know, I had forgotten all about. Like, I wanted a piano when I was 5. I thought I could play the piano. I couldn't. I didn't have any natural talent. But she felt guilty because they couldn't afford the piano or the lessons.
yeah.
And I was able to say, Mom, I can play the radio, and that's it.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And so,
And I understood
So not waiting until the end to say the 5 things is that, and as I said, that's something that if we look at it and we're in relationship with people, it's fine to go ahead and be saying those things now. And one of the things, what I will add, one thing that happens is that very often there's estrangement in families. Okay, so we know people who have been estranged from their children, right? Who are not in contact, where there's no, and then where the parent dies, or in one case the child dies and has not talked to his parents for months because he was angry, and there was no reconciliation, and that's a hole that's really hard to fill. And so where there's estrangement is to ask yourself, is my right position worth the estrangement? And that's going to, and I'm telling you right now, that's part of what's going on in this political season, where we have so much divide between us. It is, the divisiveness is huge. So we have this divide, and the question is, how can we bridge that? And it's hard. It's really hard. So to look at somebody who says things that really anger you, make your blood boil. Thanksgiving's going to be hard for a lot of families this year, and Christmas is going to be hard for a lot of families this year, and we know that. And so how do we share these 5 things? How do we say, look, I want to put down our differences long enough to share this, and we don't have to say the goodbye part. We can just say, let's talk about forgiveness and love. So how can we do that? Yeah. So well, thank y'all very much for your time. And so I want us to close with something that I think is important. It's the prayer of St. Francis, and you have it on your sheets, but it'll be on the screen. So join me in this, if you would. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. So that's it. Thank y'all.
Tell you that we had a grief support group. We still have a grief support group that's turned into the Good Grief Group, and that still is meeting. We started a year ago in July, and that group is still meeting. We still have a support group, and we meet once a month for lunch. And it has been a closed group because we bonded so well in our support group, but we're opening it up in January. We're going to start inviting anyone who needs to be part of a grief support group to be part of our group and to be part of the activities that we do. And so you'll be seeing information about that in the coming newsletters starting in January. But I wanted to let you know about that. And we do have a congregational care committee. Anytime you need or you know someone in the congregation that needs our support, we want to know about it, because we do have trained Stephen ministers who are part of the congregational care group that can walk with people in a relationship to help them through this a grief situation. So it's not just that we bring meals in or send cards or make phone calls. We can have someone who's trained to be with you or be with someone in our support group, in our church, to be there for you, to walk with you. So I just want to remind you of that. And thank y'all all for being here. I'd like to thank Salia again, who's not here, and thank Frank and my better half over there, Dave, the quiet guy that just, he's a worker bee. He does whatever I tell him to do. Oh, well, maybe not. But I pretty much do what he asked me to do too, so it works out. So thank y'all for being here. Be sure and grab some cookies and take them home. And we'll see you at church. Oh, yeah, yeah. Thanks, Marge. I forgot all about it. Marge put together these fabulous binders that will organize all your important information. And so we were selling them, but we're having a real fire sale today, and we're giving them away. So we have a few left. So if you want that, or if you want the dividers, just the dividers. We also have some leftover resources from the Area Agency on Aging. That's just a file folder that'll give you a list of things that you need to have, important papers that you need to gather up. Anyway, thank y'all so much for coming. Mm-hmm.